Started okay. Good morning to everyone. This is the third episode of the Modern Salon Podcast. Today we have my co-host Sneha and a very special guest with me, Nidan Basheer. I don't know if you guys noticed, like for the first episode, Nidan actually put a very compelling argument of regarding what we argued at the first episode. And if you don't mind, I would like to start with that first and foremost. I would like to start with your thought process and why you came to that conclusion, right? So this is a lot, but I think I'm going to sum it up in some sense. And please correct me if I'm wrong. So basically, you had two arguments, right? One regarding Marx's view of society, right? Like how Marx saw society in a time where it made sense to divide and categorize people based on class, and how he did not foresaw how post-industrial society would come into being, and how Marx was right in the sense that in a short amount of time period, Marx's ideas made relevance. And regarding that, I do agree with that. I do think that Marx's idea is in that time period, it made sense for him to do so. But as you said, like in the post-industrial society, Marx's ideas are not so much applicable as in there is still relevance, because I think that is why Marx has been one of the most discussed, perhaps the most discussed philosopher throughout time, right? Like for like 200 years, Marx's ideas has been discussed in an amazing with an amazing relevance, right? And Sneha, what do you think about that?
Okay, sorry, I didn't catch that, sir. Can you repeat?
Yeah, basically we were talking about how Marx's ideas have relevance throughout this century, and how perhaps the most applicable time when Marx's ideas had was during the society that he lived in, and how it changed, but how he still has relevance over political conversations, even to this day.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it makes sense for him to be relevant. It was really quite important that I'm not really quite well aware of that situation. I think Nidan can talk more about it. Well, his ideas I don't think his ideas would be applicable in this society for obvious reasons. But at that time, for him to have his ideas was really important and kind of quite revolutionized it. So it makes sense for him to be discussed, and yeah.
Yeah, Nidan, what are your thoughts on that? Did I sum up your argument correctly?
Yeah, okay. All right. So when I think of Marx, I usually say that he is a very successful sociologist. Like he actually succeeded in describing the society at his time, right? Like the Industrial Revolution was something that's quite unprecedented. Like the last great thing we had before the Industrial Revolution was the Agricultural Revolution. That was like, so he was kind of one of the first persons to actually, to describe the society at his time, at his age. But where he failed was to find the solutions, right? He found out the problems, he diagnosed it rightly, and then he tried to prescribe the solutions, and that's where he kind of failed. And so as an economist, he's a failure. As a sociologist, he's someone successful. And so we know today that we don't need Marxist economics to sort of develop a society, to develop an industrial society. But what we also know is that a lot of societies haven't industrialized yet, especially countries like India, even we are nowhere near industrialized. So what we need to know is whether Marx's social ideas, the ideas of class, is it relevant to, let's say, India's agriculture system or even India's early industrializing system? For example, in the case of conflict between urban labor and industrialists, for example, whether Marxist ideas apply or not. And then there is the whole theory of neo-Marxism, which I will admit I'm not quite aware of, where people are trying to retrofit Marxian ideas into today's society, to today's service sector economy. And I don't think that's quite relevant as they would like to think, but still we are a free society. It's always good to have new ideas.
Yeah. So the first argument that you posed regarding political correctness, give me a second, my phone has been locked. Okay. So the first argument that you posed regarding political correctness, so I'm going to sum it up. So basically, one thing that you said was that the idea that political correctness leads to restricted speech relies on the assumption that progressives or social justice warriors have control over the social discourse, right? So that's one point that you made. And you made the point that even they don't have that control over society right now, that control over discourse, like intellectual discourse. And the second thing is that what and what not is politically correct is decided by the society of nation. And I think you meant that political correctness is more like a contextual issue, right? It's more based on the context,
Yes,
and more based on society and stuff. So one thing that I have about the first argument is that I think progressives as a whole, like if you think about it, universities are the main carriers of intellectual discourse right now. And I do think that progressives have control over the universities. And believe me, most people would call me a progressive, although I prefer not to get categorized into stuff, because I think it's much more complex than that. I think we as individuals and our views and everything are much more complex than that. But still, I do think that social justice warriors have control over most universities. I would say that. I don't know about India, but even in the Western world, if you consider the Western institutions, I think they have control over most universities. One of the incidents that I want to talk about is, have you heard of this person called Jordan Peterson?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So while I disagree with his criticism of Marxism and stuff, I do stand with him on the fact that free speech is something that we should preserve, and that's how our societies maintain ourselves and all that. Now, when he decided to criticize Bill C-16, that was when he rose into popularity, right?
The pronoun.
And when he decided to criticize, pronoun thing, So when he decided to criticize Bill C-16, there were this university actually had him suppressed. Like you can actually see this video on YouTube where all these so-called social justice warriors actually suppressed him from speaking out. They made these noises and these protests without actually debating. I think in that sense, from what I've seen, social justice warriors do have control of the universities. It may not be true. It probably isn't true for general society as a whole, right? Progressives have never been the majority. Perhaps they will be the majority. We don't know for sure. But still, for universities, which are the main center of intellectual and political discourse, perhaps not political discourse, at least intellectual discourse, progressives have more control over them, rather opposed to other people. You know.
Nidan.
Yeah. Nidan, your mic is muted.
Mute. It's mute.
Mute.
Being heard now?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
All right.
He went again.
Next issues probably.
അതെ കുറച്ച് എഡിറ്റ് ചെയ്താൽ അതിന്റെ ഇടയ്ക്ക് ഇതാക്കി കുഴപ്പമില്ല. Okay, now.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I really hope I'm being heard now. Okay.
Yeah.
So I hope that I already heard of what you said.
Mm-hmm.
Most of it. So one thing is that universities hold like it's anything surprising or anything new. Like if universities like were as progressive as it is now, they had gay rights. They were pro-gay rights. They were anti-nuclear. They were anti-Vietnam war. And what not. So that is what universities are. They are the place where new ideas get down. And you could even argue that a sort of is kind of an orthodoxy. Like being anti-traditional, being anti-radical is the orthodoxy. That is a default position there. To be a radical means being a conservative in a university. But is it ideal? Probably not. But one thing is that universities are not society, right? Like it's not like everyone listens to professors or students and considers them being relevant. And even as a political force, we see that younger students tend to vote far lesser than their adult counterparts. So what we usually see is that when we see these ideas coming out of universities, they get filtered to the wider society. They get discussed by the professionals, the politicians, and whatnot. And usually the ideas that are supposed to work, that are actually better off, tend to get filtered through, and they get implemented. And the sort of fringe ideas, pointless ideas, usually get stuck in that sort of in that social filters, as I would like to call it. So that's one way of seeing those stuff. But in the Jordan Peterson's case, I would say both sides are kind of amplifying the issue. Right? The right side of the spectrum says he's censored way too much, and the left side is saying he's censored way too less. But here's one thing: compared to many other right-wingers, he's actually getting a lot. He's actually a mainstream guy, right? He's an academic. He has a job at the University of Toronto. Penguin Books, the biggest book producer in the world, publishes books. Now compare that to many right-wing figures, like let's say Donald Trump or something. Donald Trump is banned from Twitter. He is published by Penguin Books. That's as mainstream as it comes, right? He has a place in society. He is being heard. He is taking interviews at mainstream news channels. Of course, there are people opposing him. There are people think who he should be censored, but that's part of society. He's not being censored, right? Like if I want to see him, I can still go see him. He's there, the news channel. I can see him. Even if I don't want to, I still. In fact, I read like 2 posts or something about him in Reddit today. So that means he's still part of our social discourse, right? Even if he's hated, he's still part of it.
Yeah. One thing that I would like to point out is that I don't think personally Jordan Peterson is a right winger. Perhaps we could call him a centrist. Perhaps that's the right term. But I do think he's more like a like a classical liberal, perhaps. I don't think he's a right winger because I've read like 2 of his books, like 12 Rules for Life Beyond Lord. I wanted to see what the hype was about, right? There was a lot of hype surrounding these books, and I read them, and what I noticed is that he is actually kind of like I wouldn't go as far as to call him a progressive, but I think he is still liberal in the sense that he basically observes things, right? Like he observes the facts and he bases his views on scientific studies and stuff, right? And the truth of the matter is scientific studies may not always reflect what we want. For example, like one of the arguments that he makes is that as a society becomes more egalitarian, what happens is that, give me a second, is my camera off right now?
It's stuck right now.
Yeah, your face kind of froze there.
Give me a second. Okay, now, is it good now? Yeah. Some settings change. Okay, as I was saying, the fact of the matter is, he looks at these scientific studies and conclusions. It's an entire debate whether how much validity, like based on a philosophical stuff, like whether scientific reasoning has any proof and scientific method has any proof. That's another issue. But right now, the most practical thing, most probabilistic method of assessing the world is through science. That's what I believe. And what he does is that one of the things that he pointed out that he gets criticized a lot for is the fact that as societies become more egalitarian, the choice in occupation of men and women get different due to their biological nature. Now, it is a question whether in a completely egalitarian society will that happen, but as societies become more egalitarian, that is definitely the trend, because in Scandinavia, for example, which is probably one of the most egalitarian societies in the world, we can see the medical field is being dominated by women, whereas the engineering field is being dominated by men, right? And one of the things I would say is that he's being misrepresented by both sides. Like right-wingers claim that he is with them and he is with religion and all that stuff, but at the same time, left-wingers say the same thing, like he is with right-wingers and stuff. But I think they're both misrepresenting and misclassifying him. I think he's more like a liberal who bases his arguments and everything based on science, and also talks about the fundamental things about the fundamental nature of religion and how it affects onto the world, and that might be one of the reasons why he is classified as a conservative, right? So that's what I pretty much think about that issue. Yeah.
Can I say?
Yeah, go on.
I think he is a right winger because he's like, if you look at his followers, he's kind of hailed as a right wing rock star. It's pretty much clear, right? If you look at the following and general popularity.
Mhm.
Yeah, if I may add to that. Fine, good.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah,
Go on,
if
go
I
on.
may add to that, I actually remember a quote every time I hear classical liberal. A classical liberal is someone who would have been socially liberal before like 30, 40 years or something. Like it's a sort of antiquated way of saying that I would have been liberal before a few years. I think society has progressed enough now. Yeah, and again, the word liberal is not necessarily exclusive to me either. Like there are many right-wing liberals. Just a little bit conservative than the median population, but he's very much a liberal, right? He loves Adam Smith, for example. He loves John Locke. All of those are liberal philosophers, and he is a right-winger. So that's one thing to say. Like liberal and conservative are not mutually exclusive to each other. You can be liberal and conservative at the same time.
Yeah, that's very interesting in the sense that I don't think that's possible, because you can see it depends on how you assess the mode of what is being liberal, right? Because there are fundamental things, right? We can look at it in an economic scale, right? You can go like economically, you can go towards the communism side, you can go to the pure capitalism side, and there's like the social spectrum where you can fundamentally go down to the socially liberal side and socially conservative side. And here's the thing, I think he is economically in support. Perhaps, I don't know, economically, I think he's a centrist, because in his book, he supports a lot of left policies, like economically left policies and economically right policies. And at the same time, I think he is socially liberal, but his followers are a lot of right, because I think it's because they misrepresent what he has to say. You know, he like, for example, one example that I could give is that he says that most people want family in life. Like most people, that is the goal or the ideal to strive for based on the studies. Now, whether that is true or not, that is not the case. But what right wingers do usually is that they misrepresent that to saying that most women want family in life. So it's kind of like they're kind of misrepresent. At least that's what I've seen after looking at a lot of Reddit posts on his forum, like Jordan Peterson. So after a lot of Reddit posts and stuff, that's what I've seen. That's what I've experienced. In the sense that I do think he is a liberal in the social sense and perhaps centrist in the economic sense, and his followers and almost everybody is misrepresenting him. It's kind of like how people misrepresent Nietzsche, right? Because if you see the figure Nietzsche, you think of a far right, extreme capitalist person, but actually he was not, because fundamentally Nietzsche is extremely difficult to read. It's like his ideas are extremely difficult to grasp, and that's why I think perhaps people like the Nazis misquoted him and misrepresented him and used them to kind of support their ideology. And this may be biased, because I am a huge admirer of Nietzsche's work and Nietzsche's philosophy, but still I think there's a lot of misrepresentation going on there.
Yeah, again, if I may add to that again. So one thing there is, if Jordan Peterson is actually socially liberal, he would actually communicate it such, right? Like he knows that most of his followers are people from far right, from that sort of area of the political spectrum. And he actually tunes the message to them, right? Even if he's socially liberal, his messages are handmade to them. That's where his audience are. He knows that. He knows that the people on the far left won't read him, they won't love him, and he doesn't care. Like that's how he gets famous. That's how he gets his money. So he tunes his message to them. That's a sort of that's an element of populism there. So is that right or wrong? I'm nobody to say. Is that ethical or not? Nobody knows. But that is the reality, to be honest. Like he knows that, and he doesn't care, to be honest.
I agree with that actually.
Yeah, but here's what I think. Like Sam Harris, for example, is like respects Jordan Peterson usually, they have, like they had a discourse. Like I saw this discourse on
Brett
Pangburn,
Weinstein.
like Brett Weinstein, and so
Yeah.
and one of the things I think they differ in the, I think they're same in the sense of how they are liberal, but differ in the sense of how they base morality and ethics based on. So Jordan basically has the side of like making the role of religion and how important it is, in the sense that it brings out another kind of foundational knowledge that humans have. Because if you look at every religion, almost all of them have kind of like the same kind of archetypal stories and all that stuff. So he talks about how religion and how important it is to understand it and base our morality on that. And I think that's where Sam Harris kind of digs in, and he says morality should be based on facts and science and all that stuff. But in the sense that he caters to the right population, right? So here's one of my fundamental issues, right? Right population believes that you are responsible for stuff, right? I think that's one of the major differences. Like more conservative people believe that it is your fault for doing something, for things happening to you, right? Suppose some event happens to you, let's call it event A, and it is bad, right, according to you, and they say that you are to blame, right, for that particular event. And the left population, what they consider, they analyze society, mostly the postmodernists analyze society as kind of like a power struggle between the oppressed and the oppressors, and they say no, it is because you were oppressed. And that's one of the places where I disagree with most liberal philosophies, where I think it's more like an existentialist take on stuff. I think you are fundamentally responsible for everything, and so is everyone. Everyone is fundamentally responsible for everything. That's kind of the philosophies that I follow by, and I think that's where that's why people may misrepresent Jordan Peterson, because he talks about responsibility a lot, and that kind of is attuned to the right wingers, right? Right wingers focus more on responsibility. I do believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Like, what do you guys think about that?
No, Nidan can go on first.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of stand in the middle of the road with regards to your individual responsibility argument. So while I agree with you, I actually agree with you that I am responsible for what I am, for all success and failures, but I don't think that should be an excuse from refraining from reforming the society to actually take a look at what we have done, to fix up what we have done, etc. I actually adhere to Malcolm Gladwell's view here. Malcolm Gladwell argues that success is a function of opportunity and individual talent. So if you look at, say, an individual case, in my case or in Sneha's case or your case, it is more a function of what we do than a social function. But we take society as a whole or a social group as a whole. Let's say take women, or let's say in America, the black community. It is more often than not a social function more than an individual function. If you're taking a society, so let's say you see fewer women in science. It's not because not just because women are not interested in science. It is more because society discourages them to do so. But in my case, if I hate math and I don't want to study math, it is because I hate math, not because someone else forced to hate math or something. So the larger we increase the population sample, the more the social process becomes relevant. But if you take it in the individual scale, what matters more is what I do, what are the choices I have, and what I want. So yeah, individual responsibility matters, but using it as an excuse to refrain from reforming society is rather destructive, in my opinion.
Yeah, Sneha, what do you think about that?
I agree more with Nidan, what Nidan said, because there is a kind of historical operation for most sections of the society. Not yeah, there are sections of society which has been historically marginalized and oppressed. So the equality of opportunities, we can come to that topic, I guess, from this. It won't be the same for everyone. So we need to consider that too. So, and rather than saying, well, we kind of accept all these things, like the society actually views kind of has that left that historical baggage now when we kind of reform itself. That doesn't mean that all those sections, all those previously marginalized groups will have it. Like take the caste society, caste in India. We still have reservations, and it has so we could argue about whether it should go on. It has its own importance. It is a ladder, much needed ladder for others to get up to.
I agree in the sense that it is not a practical idea when you look at society as a whole. I agree with that. I think it's more the argument that I posed was like more like a logical one, right? More like it's kind of like it's perhaps how I do things. I more think about them in the sense that what are the all possibilities and how do we interpret these possibilities? What are the surefire things to notice and so on and so on. So this is basically my argument. I agree this is not very practical, but this is my argument. So we have infinite number of possibilities in this world, right? We have infinite number of possibilities, infinite number of things to do, infinite number of concepts to emerge. And so it isn't the fact that is this practical or even probabilistic when you take a mathematical perspective on that. It isn't the fact that whether it is probabilistic or practical. It's basically thinking about it like in like a logical sense, perhaps a bit too idealistic for practical use. But here's basically what my argument says. There are infinite possibilities in the world. Suppose even A happens and you are not happy with it. Let's say even A happens and you're not happy with it. Now, since there are infinite possibilities, there is a possibility of even A not happening due to your action, right? So you could have taken that action to make even A not happen. And that's kind of my sense in how responsibility works, right? You could have done that in order to prevent this, but you didn't do that, and hence you're responsible. But this still prevents the past events, which we clearly cannot change, right? So I think that's more of an issue there. We clearly have to think through whether past events are responsible and stuff. Obviously, we can't change past events. So I think it's a responsibility in the sense that every moment, every event that happens from the second that you were, born is actually your responsibility. And there is actually quite if you look further into it, it depends on when we start seeing responsibility. Because as a child, we don't have any responsibility, right? As a child, we don't know whether we're responsible for stuff and everything. In the end, I think it's more complex than it looks. But as an individual philosophy, I think it always works out very well. And furthermore, it doesn't necessarily refrain from changing society as a whole. Because I think one of the thing is that, suppose let's say, if you feel like there's discrimination against a particular group, you are fundamentally, you are taking that action because you think, okay, I am responsible for changing it. I may not be responsible for this event being the way it was or it is, right? But I am responsible for changing it. There is a sense of responsibility there too, right? You're taking responsibility on the fact that, yes, I want to change. I want to take part in this change and to make society better for this group of people. I think there is responsibility in that sense. I don't think it necessarily refrains people from creating social change. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go on.
Well, about responsibility of take again, if let's say X is a marginalized group, there is a normal family living there. Rather than trying to change how the entire thing works, they would probably cater to their own needs, basic needs. So I don't think most would be, like, in a general sense, you can't really expect everyone to come up and take the leadership to change the things.
Yeah, no, I do think that, that's why I said it first, like, this isn't a really practical idea. This is not at all a practical idea, in the sense that I think, because to be honest, I do think that most people, I don't mean this as a bad thing, right? Like, there is no right or wrong way of living or anything, but most people won't take the responsibility for everything. At least they may take the responsibility for their own actions, but most people will not take the responsibility for everything. That's kind of a general statement. I think it's gonna be very rare for people to see that. But I think personally, in my experience, right, I think the taking responsibility for everything has helped me in progressing tremendously. You know, that concept of taking responsibility in everything, that kind of puts things into perspective for me. And this might be a completely subjective experience. I agree with that. But that's kind of my take on it. And let's move on to the equality of opportunity, right? So that's what we should talk about. And so yeah, Nidan or Sneha, like, what do you guys think of it? Like, what about equality of opportunity and stuff?
Then can start.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it goes without saying that equality as a concept is a non-starter. Like, even if you assume an ideal world, you cannot have equality, right? Like, for example, after World War II, West Germany started out as an equal society. Like, they gave the same amount of money to everyone, and now they are kind of a normal country with nominal equality. So that doesn't work. And they actually came across an interesting thought experiment. Like, imagine an ideal society where you have the same amount of money, the same sized house, the same sized family, and everything else. But you cannot escape nature, right? Like, who is going to live in the deserts of Sahara and the forests of Congo, or who gets to live in the northern plains of India or in the southern China, for example? And who gets to be in the upstream of rivers? Who gets to be in the downstream of rivers? Who gets to live in the windy side of the town and the dirty side of the town? Who gets to live near the waste plant, and etc. Right? So these small kinds of inequalities actually exacerbate over time, right? They might start out as small, but when you multiply it over generations, it turns into something structural, and that's how I believe structural inequality starts. So now the next best alternative we have is what we define as equality of opportunity. But our first problem is that how do we define equality of opportunity? What opportunity are we exactly talking about? Do we need equality of opportunity if we are looking at, say, admissions to university? Or do we even need equality of opportunity when we look at, say, buying yachts? Do we need poor people to buy as much yachts as the rich people, right? There is a definition of the problem. So if you ask everyone in society, everyone says, okay, we need equality of opportunities. But if you break down that definition into components, that's where you find a lot of disagreements, right? That's where the traditional left-right divide is being seen. So unless we have a common definition, there is no way that you could get anywhere close to actually realizing that goal, whatever that is.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, for me, basically, equality of opportunity. Let me think about it. Like, equality of opportunity is about, like, if you look at the broad sense, like broad sense of what, if you take definite word by word, we can see that equality of opportunity is about essentially everyone having equal opportunity. And I agree with your thought on that, like how it becomes more complex as we break down it into components and all that stuff. But I do think here's why I support equality of opportunity, because for every person of every single motive, like even for a selfish person, let's assume everybody's selfish, right? Everybody's extremely selfish. Equality of opportunity is desirable because even for a selfish person, one can exploit the talent of other people, right? It brings more, like every single talent to the kind of free market or whatever, to society, so to speak. And I think that is why I agree with equality of opportunity, because even if you're selfish, for people with any kinds of motive, it is desirable because we can ultimately even for this is the argument that I'm making. Even for a selfish person can exploit other people's talent, and it's like a desirable, a win-win situation for everyone. And I think we're not having that, and I think we should perhaps have equality of opportunity. But there are problems with the definition. So, what do you think? Like, how do you define equality of opportunity for you, at least?
It's very difficult. I think it will differ from most people. So in the basic sense, it is to give everyone at least a chance to, like, it would be giving the same chance, I would say, for everyone. But I have personally think, like, it should start from it should be given in the starting level, say for education. Like, no one should be left behind to get the basic needs. Education helps those things. And it can be, I could be wrong here. The whole just when you come to the higher levels, like for when colleges or jobs, I personally do not think that. I mean, yes, in India you have its own uses and its own advantages there are regarding the caste and all, but if, like, in the present time, should we like regulate it a bit? Like, are we doing it like in exceeded sense? I would say. I mean, that's a question actually. So basically, it's I actually giving everyone the same chance to get into the race. I mean, yes, we are in kind of in a very competitive world. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. That's very interesting because as I think about it more, I think it's more like finding out what the basic components of of life are. What are the basic components? Like suppose, let's say education for one, let's say housing for another, and taking all these components. So it's important to identify the correct components, and taking all these components and making sure everyone at least has a component worth worth something such that that worth is enough for them to get into the competition or get into society and compete with others who may potentially have more, right? So suppose there is a rich person and there is let's say a middle class person. So even the rich person and middle class person must have the same kind of, like, what do you call, same the more rich a person becomes, that shouldn't matter whether he gets into or he leads in the race or something, right? That shouldn't matter in the sense that if a person, obviously there are other differences we have to take into account. Let's say, for example, one thing might be IQ or EQ, for example, all these natural talents, but that's something we cannot control. Let's take that aside for a moment. But what I think equality of opportunities, as I think more about it, it's about creating a society where social differences don't matter in such a way that people can compete with the same opportunity in such that social differences don't matter in that. Like, if a person is, let's say, middle class, and if a person is rich, the amount of richness of the other person shouldn't matter, shouldn't account as a factor in whether this person is in this competition or not. You get the point, right? Yeah, so that's basically how I define equality of opportunity. So Nidan, what do you think about that definition? Is there something fallacious about that, or what do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, your definition reminds me of something I read in my geography textbook. There is something called basic needs approach to development. This was devised by the International Labour Organization, and if I may read from that, they have identified 6 basic needs: health, education, food, water supply, sanitation, and housing. So the idea is that government should spend on these so that everyone would develop, right? So that's one way of saying it. And this also has a lot of critiques. So, for example, there is no question of choice, or it ignores all other factors, for example. And that's one way of defining equality of opportunities. And I think that's a refined definition too. So in my case, I would say equality of opportunity contains 2 elements. One is to divorce monetary strength, like say net worth from opportunity. How do we make money matter less in the matters of opportunity? And the second is to have a near perfect social mobility. I think social mobility is like the determining factor of equality of opportunity. If you have a more socially mobile society, you are inevitably going to have equality of opportunity, right? And social mobility, of course, not just means that a poor person can end up rich over a lifetime. It also means that rich persons will also get less rich over the course of a life. And we can actually measure social mobility. We can even define social mobility way better than equality of opportunity. And if you're talking policy, for example, I would rather advocate for a policy for more social mobility than equality of opportunity, because it's much more easier to measure it, it's much more easier to implement it, and there is a much more broader agreement to define what social mobility is than equality of opportunity. But yeah, there are different approaches, and yeah, that's what I think about equality of opportunity. Social mobility leads to equality of opportunity, so we need social mobility. And of course, I believe that the job of a government is actually to provide basic needs for citizens, both these 6 needs and also some additional needs. So a mixture of these both can lead to equality of opportunity.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think the problem right now with equality of opportunity and the related areas is that we know that we want this particular ideal, but nobody has a surefire way of how to get there. Like nobody knows for sure. Like there are ways, there are some that are better than the other, but nobody knows the best way to get there. And I think that's very interesting in the sense that it's quite like this is one of the things that I believe, like everything is more complex than it seems, right? Like every single thing. You take a look at some things and anything, any concept, any idea, any abstraction, anything. It's more complex than it seems. And I think perhaps through I don't know, it's very complicated to think about it. In the sense that there are multiple ways you could do it. One way that I don't think it is practical yet, but I would prefer that way, because what if we had, I don't think it's possible in the society as sense. What if we had like this is more like a philosophical thing, right? It's not so much practical. I don't know if even if somebody will find, what if there was a way to potentially use science and philosophy and logic to construct a certain logical proof of what was going to happen. Like this happens and there are these possibilities and these possibilities lead to this and all that stuff. I think that would be a very interesting and really remarkable way of determining all kinds of problems in society. Perhaps that's because I more have a mathematical background, but I think like that because of that. But I don't think it's going to be very practical in the sense that I don't think anybody is going to find, because there are a lot of problems with subjectivism, objectivism, and all these things come to surface. But I think it would be very cool, so to speak, if we could see like a rigorous logical system that could potentially solve all these problems, accounting everything into possibilities. And I think it's even a question of stuff like super intelligence in artificial intelligence, for example, super AI and all that stuff. What if a potential AI could solve this problem? What do you guys think about that? For example, this idea of AI or advanced, let's say, mathematical algorithms or something like that. Let's say AI for now, to keep the discussion more broad in the sense. What do you guys think about it? Can an AI, this is a little bit off topic, but I still want to know your opinion. So can an AI potentially create ways backed up by logical proofs to solve problems in society? What do you guys think about that?
That already kind of exists in my opinion. Like there is a whole branch of social science called computational social science, and especially in economics, which I care the most about, it is more or less infested by computers now. Like even from first year undergraduates are now studying computer science and programming languages and stuff, and more or less everything is being modeled now. There are degrees in social data science, for example. So that kind of exists. So can it solve social problems? It actually helps, right? Like we can test how policy works in a virtual society before testing out on real society. We can test how industry it will affect society, or stimulate packages will affect society. That certainly helps. But here are two key issues I find with this approach. Like one is that someone has to create this, right? It's not like AI breeds itself or something. Like humans have to create this. So our biases to society will be affected in these models too, right? Like we are programming the model, we set the biases, we set the assumptions, we set what impacts what, and then we manipulate it, right? There is no objective way of doing it. So especially in economics, that's more evident. Like there are so many schools of thought in economics, right? There are the classicals and the Keynesians. So Keynesians argue that there should be more taxation and more spending, and classicals argue that there should be less taxation and less spending. So when someone creates an economic model, their economic belief will be affected there, right? And even in case of sociology, there are so many sociological models, and their social views will be reflected in that too, right? So there could not be one objective way, but it helps, right? Like if a Keynesian economist and a classical economist gets together and creates a model, maybe that would be better than one of them creating one model. And the second is that can we measure society like we measure scientific experiments or something? Right? When we model society and social phenomena, we take a lot of assumptions, right? In our economics textbook, we actually have more assumptions than the things we measure, right? If an economy has 4 sectors, we are only measuring 2 sectors. We assume that the other 2 sectors are constant. So he is assuming that going to be a good thing, right? There is something called black swan event. Even if you think something doesn't exist or won't happen, it can happen. Right. So in society, we see a lot of exogenous forces. Like before 10 or 15 years, can anyone imagine that a guy like Donald Trump would become the president of the United States? Can someone model that to include that? those exogenous things matter a lot, right? Those small social processes, those black swan events, or if I'm using mathematical words, fat tail events, right? So those can happen a lot, and those have impact the society a lot more than say they impact computer science or science as a whole even, right? So that's two issues I find, but it is better than not using it. It's better than refraining from using it, but it's kind of too optimistic to expect that it would yield as much utility as it does to, let's say, mathematics or natural sciences or something.
Yeah, I kind of side with that. I agree with that. Like societies cannot be like. Are you ever like familiar with the film Minority Report?
No,
It is a,
I think I've heard of it,
yeah, it is a
but
Steven.
I haven't watched it.
Yeah, it is a Steven Spielberg film, not complete. It's quite complex. Basically, predicting crime. Like they kind of make a system of pre-crime, and it ends up badly. The that setup is stopped. They kind of create a system to predict crime and predict crime before it happens, and they can stop it. That really doesn't work well due to obvious reasons. I don't like even in economics. There was something like IMF actually like were kind of talking like kind of what wait, let me rephrase that. Yeah, IMF did research kind of studies on inflation, and they couldn't like the accuracy, basically the accuracy rate when it comes to people, they have their own preferences. We cannot really predict that or change that. It is influenced by a lot many factors than like we can assess maths or science like facts properly. So society may not be, yeah, like we cannot do well, it's not practical. I think not much. It would be ideal, yeah, but not implemented. Well, it can't be. I think.
Yeah, no, I think it's mainly because like perhaps I think one of the reasons perhaps people are attracted to this idea of kind of like an AI that solves stuff. I think I would like to like it's people like who are more interested in the mathematical side of things, right? Can be it's more like as you said. I don't think it's practical. I don't know if it could be practical anywhere in the future. Perhaps it could be, perhaps it could be not. But it is quite complicated, and it comes up with a lot of issues, right? Like for example, one of the things that determines everything is free will, right? There's an argument of whether free will exists or not, but free will, assuming it exists, right? It definitely, and I do believe it as an axiom. Like it's like I think, therefore I am free. That's what I believe, right? So it's essentially free will matters a lot in all these arguments. Like a human has infinite possibilities, and we can never predict what a human is gonna do. What a human is gonna do, we can never predict that. And even if we assume we could predict that some way using brain mapping, if the technologies become so sophisticated as to predict them, even then, suppose we can only predict the event in as far as let's say we predict an event A, so human beings thinking that, but at the next moment he thinks another thing. So we can only predict an event after he or she thought of it, right? So it's kind of all these philosophical dilemmas that come with this concept of an AI that predict stuff, and that's why I think the most accurate statement, accurate description of the world, as far as now, is the description that perhaps Nietzsche and more recently the postmodern escapes, that there are no facts, there are only interpretations, right? Like that's kind of the accurate description, which I think that a society, as far as we know, with our knowledge that we have, there are no facts, there are only interpretations. And that certainly might not be true in areas like mathematics, but even in science, it is kind of true, right? Like there are a lot of like even AIs have become black boxes. There are theorems called sandwich theorem, which essentially says that it doesn't matter what classification model you feed data to, everyone will perform on average with the same accuracy. That's like a theorem, mathematically proved theorem. I think, except if you take logic and mathematics aside, I think it's more or less true that there are only facts. There are no facts, there are only interpretations. So yeah, what do you guys think about that? Like what do you guys think?
This is kind of a fundamental concept in social sciences too. Like for example, stock markets are a very good information of that. Nobody knows perfect information about markets. Nobody knows what is going to be the future, and the way to do that, the best alternative to that is what we call as aggregating information, right? We are aggregating everyone's part beliefs, and then we are kind of assuming that that aggregation of part beliefs will turn into a prediction that an aggregate population knows better than any single part of the population. So far, so good. But what we see in the last few years is that that belief is not really panning out so well, right? There has been so many bubbles. There has been so many places where stocks have been misvalued. There has been places where it didn't really pan out so well, right? So we kind of assume that individuals are kind of rational judges, and when all of them aggregate together, we get a perfectly rational judges. But that is by taking the critical assumption that we are independent thinkers, right? All of us have our own views of in the world. All of us have our own unique information, and we are judging to it, right? But what we saw in the last few years is that everyone is being fed the same information. Everyone listens to one or two news sources they have, and that is being reflected in this aggregate judgment, even in the case of stock markets or anything like that. And that is affecting how we take information, how we perceive this. And this concept even goes further, like in the case of price, right? We usually think of price as something we need to pay. But more fundamentally, according to economist Hayek, he thinks that prices are signals, right? Prices are signals of willingness of a buyer to buy and a seller to sell. But that can be distorted too. Like it can be distorted by governments. It can be distorted, for example, by the pandemic, right? The sellers are not able to sell, buyers are not able to buy even though they want to, right? So these signals are less effective than they were before, right? So when we model this, that is going to be reflected in that, right? Yeah.
So, so yeah, I think we have kind of got onto every single view on that issue particularly. Now this is interesting. Like we went through, like, one of the things that we talked about before the podcast episode was that we talked about a lot about reservations, right? Like are reservations practical, and how they help in equality of opportunity and all that stuff. So I think fundamentally my view on reservations is the fact that it is quite complicated in the sense that it reinforces this equality of outcome, equality of outcome. But at the same time, in countries like India, it is not really possible to get equality of opportunity without equality of outcome. It's kind of complex in the way to think about it. It can even lead to this debate whether equality of opportunity will truly come without equality of outcome, right? It even comes to that. Like, think about it. Like, suppose there is a rich person, as I said, and there's a middle class person. What if being rich increases his or her, let's say, self-esteem? Now that could be a given, like that could be a huge factor in how, let's say, in a competition, like how much self-esteem a participant has, and being rich actually influences that, even if we consider in an equality of opportunity, society filled with equality of opportunity. And like that is quite like an interesting thing to think about, whether equality of outcome, equality of opportunity comes without equality of outcome. So what do you guys think about that? Like how reservations relate to this idea of equality of outcome and equality of opportunity and all that? Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah, of course. Go first.
Nidan can start, right?
Yeah. Okay, then I guess. So reservations are an interesting topic, to be honest. Like last year, I think during this time of the year, I wrote a post on Quora arguing that reservations are kind of irrelevant. The current class-based reservations are relevant because it is not working. We have tried that for 70 years. It is not working. So I think we should try something else. But recently, I actually delved into the actual numbers of reservation, right? How many people are getting the benefits? How many people are, finding it useful? And actually, that number is actually abysmally small, right? So, for example, in the public sector, including central and state governments, there are only 2 lakh SC and ST persons employed. 2 lakh. That's like less than half of the population of the city of Kolkata. And
Mm-hmm.
so even if you include their families, it would be what? Nearly a million or so people, 10 lakhs. And India's CST population ranges in the hundreds of millions. So that's the thing. And in India's population, only 7% are actually college graduates. So if you assume that, let's say 10 or 15% of the seats go to CSTs, that's only like 1% or something of the population, CST population, an Indian population, who are benefiting from this. So it's only a small demographic, in my opinion. So can reservation impact society? It has. For people who have benefited from reservation, it has improved their lives, right? The people of the CST classes who have gotten to these elite colleges and gotten this job, they have benefited. But has these reserved groups as a whole has benefited from reservation? No, it has not, because we don't have enough public sector jobs. Not that we've had to, but we don't. And nor do we have enough college seats or enough resources to educate everyone in the country. We don't. So that's one of the reasons why reservations has not empirically worked. But reservation and the world is a fundamental concept. It goes beyond empirical evidence, in my opinion. So do we need to have a class-based reservation over, let's say, an economic-based reservation, like I argued for last year? So one of the, again, empirical problems we face is that how do we measure income? Right? Only 3% or so of the Indian population pays income taxes. And even they are underreporting their incomes. So how can government actually estimate their incomes, right? There's no way that government can, estimate the income of 1.3 billion people without spending a huge amount of money, which actually kind of negates the purpose. Ideally, we should, but we aren't. So in some sense, class is like a good proxy of economic well-being, at least now, right? If you are a CST, you are likely to be poorer than a general person. If you are obese, you are more likely to be in the middle class. But that is not perfect, but that is a good proxy. And for the groups that are benefiting from this, they are actually doing well. But how do we, how do we bring class justice to people who are outside the ambit of this reservation? Outside are the people who getting into colleges or in public sector jobs, the only one worthy of social upliftment. Like we need to think of other creative ways to reach the other dark half of the population who aren't benefiting from any of this. So, taking reservation away or expanding reservation does very little because it only impacts a a small part of the population. So we need something else, not just reservations.
Yeah, I actually initially around 2 years ago, I used to think that reforming that structure, like doing it in an economical sense rather than that caste or class sense would be beneficial. But privilege is a thing. It really acts upon we cannot say there are people who needs it, and whether reservations are a thing which will eventually lead them out of that structure, and we can hope for a society where the class or caste system doesn't exist. Whether reservations are a path which would lead to that is questionable.
That's interesting. It's when you think about it, like reservation, as Nidan mentioned, like it is impractical to measure the income and base the reservations on that. And I do believe completely looking at it from a probabilistic perspective, in the sense that I do think that class can act as a good proxy for these stuff, because basically one of the things that we do in statistics is doing Markov modeling. This is basically taking the past events and predicting the future based on that. And I think in that sense it makes sense, but I think we have all reached the general consensus that there can be a better system, but we don't know necessarily how to formulate that and to manifest that into the society. I think we can all agree on that certain point. But for now, I agree with what Nidan said. Class is a good proxy for reservations, as it is quite clear from past events that is quite, and we could even consider adding existing data, like not just the past, like existing data on how much caste relates how much reservations have affected the caste, so that they could increase their income or decrease their income, and all that factors could be considered into creating perhaps a better system to formulate this how reservations should be given out. So yeah, that's what I think about it. Mhm. And one of the interesting things that we talked about before this conversation as well was think about death penalties, right? I know this is quite a controversial subject, and yeah, I'm gonna. This is very weird because I actually did a video on death penalty. Like me and my friend did a video on death penalty. That's on YouTube, and I actually argued that death penalty is like not good as it's not ethical. But I have not necessarily the death penalty, but I've grown apart from that because I now believe that objective morality does not exist and all that things about morality. But that's another thing. But right now, death penalty seems like a very complicated subject because I still think it should not be done because this is basically my argument for it. There is talent on any side of the equation. There is talent. And we should do, as a society, to move forward, we should preserve that talent and nourish it as much as possible, right? And it is possible that it is not probable, that's a distinction I'm thinking. It is not probable that men or women who do heinous crimes are talented. It is possible. It is possible. And even if we don't consider talent itself, it is possible to use them in a way to benefit society as a whole. Or perhaps it sounds like I'm sort of tiring for saying this, use them and stuff. But the point is, the point is to utilize human resources sufficiently. I think death penalty shouldn't be a case unless they pretty much agree. Like I would want death penalty. I think it deviates from death penalty in the sense that I think anyone who wants to be, perhaps mercy killed or something in depression or any kind of there are people who have like chronic diseases and stuff who cannot lead lives that they want, and but that's an opinion. So my point is death penalty should be banned in the sense that if they don't agree with it, it should be banned, and perhaps we can utilize and they can utilize their full potential in a sense that it would benefit them and society more. So what do you guys think about that whole issue of death penalty?
Yeah, it becomes quite sensitive topic, right? And complex. So I think there are many things. Like first of all, it's based on the idea that free will exists, and that itself is questionable. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. So even I don't believe like. Perhaps this argument is going to slide into free will, but I think like what is your argument against free will, so to speak? I just want to know like what do you say? Like why does free will why isn't free will something that exists, right?
Well, I don't know. Well, I would like free will to exist. Like I could really do whatever. Like, it was probably Sam Harris. We should really tag Jordan Peters and Sam Harris into this. We have been talking about them a lot.
Yeah.
Well, Sam Harris argues that free will is an illusion, that basically whether you believe that free will exists or whether you believe that it doesn't exist, we live in the same way. It's basically how we are governed. Like there are two things to sum it up. We do things because of two reasons. One is that we could be forced to do something, or we do it, or we believe that we do it just because we want to do it. And this want is quite the tricky thing there, because we cannot change our wants. The want to argument comes there. Basically it says that we do not decide by ourselves what we want and what we do not want. That inside, like it is determined by various of factors. So we are not exactly doing, like we do not have, like the thing is we do only what we want. That want is limited there. It's determined by other things too. So that is a case against free will.
No, that's interesting. Nidan, what do you think about the surrounding issue of death penalty and related to that free, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I'll talk about death penalty first. So death penalty is kind of useless in deterring crime. Like multiple studies in multiple places. So multiple times they have proven this again and again and again that it doesn't do anything to deter crime, right? Nobody is going to think about being hanged when they're committing a heinous crime. Nobody thinks about that. Nobody is rational when they are committing a crime. But I actually found one recent study or so it's actually an interesting argument. Like it is that death penalty is actually a wonderful public policy tool, right? So thing is that in developing countries, we don't have a good law enforcement system, right? We don't have enough police enforcement. We don't have enough cameras or a proper judicial system and whatnot. So the public's trust in the system is pretty low. But things like public hangings, and not like literally public, but like public in a sense that everybody knows about it. Public hangings are actually a good policy tool to boost people's trust in the public system, in the law enforcement system, or even the judicial system. So when you see, okay, a rapist has been hanged, oh, that's wonderful. Our legal system is doing its job, right? That's better than saying, okay, 4 people got 10-year deaths and 10-year jail sentences for something, right? It's a good public tool. It's a good way of saturating the mass. What do you say? What do you call those? Let's say.
Satisfy.
Yeah, to satisfy the hunches of the masses, so to say. But is it ethical or not? I think it is not ethical. But that's a debate we can have. Like, I think we should see death penalty as a sort of sacrificing criminals for the greater good of the society, in some sense. Like, it gives people a sense of justice, right? So if you know that, okay, if I'm a victim of a crime and I know that, okay, the perpetrator can be hanged, I'd be very happy to go to the police station and report the crime, rather than say, if the perpetrator went to jail for 5 years, right? But it doesn't deter crime empirically, we know that. But can this increase, let's say, reports of crimes, or can it increase the number of people going to police station and reporting crime? We don't know. But that's one argument I found recently, right? And going to the topic of free will, like, I'd be honest, I don't know nothing about the biological or philosophical sides of it. But here's how I like to see it, right? I think the question in and of itself is kind of, what you say, misguided, in my opinion, at least. Like, doesn't matter if we have actually objective free will or not. It only matters is that can we simulate free will, right? Does it seem free will to us? Does it seem that each of us are unique and takes unique decisions in our own accord? Can I predict what you or Sneha are doing? As long as I can't, I think it's easier to assume that free will does exist and doesn't exist. Now, of course, I don't know whether it empirically exists or not. I know nothing about the science stuff, but that's like a good way of thinking about it. I'm not saying I'm right or something, but that's just something I think about.
Yeah, and I think, like, one of the things that you said was that is it ethical for death penalty to exist? Now, this is where things might get a little weird or controversial, something. I don't believe in, like, morality, so to speak. I think morality is a social construct. I believe that it is important. Like, legality is important, laws are important, but I think laws are a different thing from morality. Like, I follow laws. And I think that's completely different from how morality is structured. There is a relation. I'm not denying that it is related, but there is difference. And I think morality as a fact is fundamentally this is great book, amazing book called Genealogy of Morals by Friedrich Nietzsche. And he basically talks about how the Judeo-Christian moral system came to being. Basically, the theory he poses is that there were Romans, there were these 2 classes, right? Slaves and the masters. And what the masters did was, masters embodied their quality. So masters were more likely to be more strong people, more conscientious, and all that. And masters took these qualities of being strong and being being strong and being conscientious, being more, let's say, intelligent, which is still debatable. So they took all these qualities about themselves, and they said that these qualities of who we are, that is good. And these qualities of who we are not, that is bad. So these qualities of who they were not were the qualities of slaves. And it's an interesting, like, it's very interesting. It was a great strategy. It was an amazing strategy with slaves. What the slaves did was, they said, these qualities that you deem as bad, they are actually good. They are actually the best quality. So they made, let's say, the ability of not getting anything and to the fact that we don't want anything. So it's kind of like the ability, their weakness became the strength, right? And they kind of turned this around on the master side. And by in itself, it is actually a wonderful strategy. Like, it's like, it blows my mind every single time how they thought of that, like, It completely blows my mind. And they took these moral system, they reversed it completely, and that's how basically the Christian religion and Judeo-Christian religion came to shape. And there's quite a debate over that. But the point is, morality is still like a social construction. Let's look at animal levels, right? They don't have exactly an ethical system, and it's debatable whether animals have whether it's because animals don't have consciousness, and even whether animals have consciousness in and of itself. And that's all debatable. But the point is, I think fundamentally morality is something socially constructed, and it is more productive for an individual and for individuals specifically to create these value systems, because fundamentally the useful side of morality is values, right? Like you need values to guide us. Otherwise, you don't have anything to stop you from doing impulsive things and expedient things. Like if you have a value system that says, suppose, don't drink alcohol, right? Now for me, I fundamentally think that's a good value, because alcohol is not good for your health and all that stuff. Now, if you don't have a value system like that, there is no way of controlling you, or there is no way to prevent you from resorting to, let's say, hedonism, right? You take what is pleasurable at the moment, you do that. And I fundamentally think that is not a good way to go. And I think the useful side of morality is values. And what Nietzsche told was that we have to, as individuals, we have to destroy these value systems that society has imposed upon us. And we should create these new values that we deem necessary and change it. It should be adaptable. That's one of the points. Like it should not be static, rigid values. This is a balance between order and chaos, if I may say what Jordan Peterson is saying. It's kind of like that. So that's what I believe in the sense that morality or ethics, I don't want to use those, but I want to use the words of values. So there are values that needs to be constructed, that needs to be destroyed, that needs to be reviewed and updated and changed, So kind of like how the values should be constructed by the individuals themselves. And I think that would help in an individual level, but it is still questionable whether it would help in the development of society, because let's think about a thought experiment for a moment. There are these individuals who create their own values, and it is possible that they have contradictory values and that society will always remain in conflict. And that's quite interesting. Like this is all from like an ideal perspective. We still don't know what would happen if all the individuals in society would create their own values, and you don't even know if most people would do that. This is like, what do you guys think about this stuff? Like individuals creating their own values and all that stuff? Yeah.
Well, as when you said morality doesn't exist, as an objective morality doesn't exist, or like even in subjective way?
I think objective morality doesn't exist. It depends. Like there is a distinction between universal and objective that I like to make. Universal, what I define as universal is something every conscious entity has in common, right? And I don't think probably universal morality doesn't exist. I'm not even saying that. I'm not denying its existence, but I think most probably universal morality doesn't exist. But objectively, in the objective sense, morality does not exist. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think. Yeah. I don't really think that we can. Yeah. Objective morality. I don't really. I do agree with you in that sense. But that what you said is just a lot. Many things there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm kind of pinpointing what to say. Yeah. If you want, you can go on.
Yeah, while you collect your thoughts, Nidan, do you have any thoughts on this? Like, I know this is a lot, like, I speak a lot, but yeah.
Okay, so I would say morality exists on two levels. On one level, we have individual morals. I choose to believe what I believe. I have my own views and principles. And on the other hand, there is no objective morality, of course, but there is what I would call an aggregate morality, right? All of our moral preferences are mapped, they are aggregated. And the common denominators are what is mostly enforced, right? And laws are kind of an applied version of these morals, right? Laws are made by people's representatives, and they're supposed to represent our moral values. And that's how at least it's supposed to work in the ideal world. But there is something I heard of in international relations. It's called a principal agent problem, right? So we are kind of delegating these representatives and the judges to uphold our moral stances, to uphold our aggregate morality. But are they the actual arbiters of morality? Are they equipped to do that? Are they equipped to do those functions? Do they have the necessary tools to do those, right? Like, for example, in India's case, right, we have a far right government, they would love to, remove the secular parts of the constitution to remove some of the fundamental rights. Can they do? No, they cannot. Even if most of the nation might agree to that, there are hindrances to that. And there are, of course, works in reverse. Like, can we do good things in that sense? Like, can we update our morals to a somewhat subjectively good sense? The institutions and the legal system can prevent it. So, in some sense, there is a sort of disconnect between what our aggregate morality is and how these are reflected in our laws too, right? For example, in the issue of gay rights, right? We don't have legal gay marriage, and it took a bunch of judges to say that it is legal, right? It's not based on a vote, it's not based on a law. A bench of 5 judges said that okay, it is legal. Now it is legal. So what is intriguing is that this whole issue came into the hand of these 5 random people, right? It's not. We are a nation of 1.3 billion people. This is going to affect lots of people. And at the end of the day, it came to 5 people. That's fascinating, to be honest. And that's interesting way of morality is being played out in our society, right?
Yeah, about the whole like we need laws to govern ourselves, but do you think that if there are no laws, that people would really lead to a hedonistic lifestyle?
That's interesting. I'm not talking about like laws. In fact, I do think, like, let's say if people don't have values, so to speak, I do think there is a high chance that people would do hedonistic things. Like, this is quite complicated because there's a question of anarchy and subsequent consequences when the laws diminish and all that stuff. This is quite interesting because there is this version of like society that I forgot who said this. Like, yeah, there's an anarcho-syndicalism. Like, there are these communities, right? These self-sustaining communities. They live in a society without laws or anything. They help each other out for their own purpose. It is based on the assumptions that humans are fundamentally selfish. Right? They do things because they think it benefits them, and even that is questionable in the sense that are humans selfish or selfless? That even if you leave all that possibilities, it's interesting because I do think without values, and these values can come in the form of laws or morality or whatever it is, humans would fundamentally prefer hedonism. I do believe that. Perhaps there's a high chance, at least, there is a high chance of people preferring hedonism if they destroyed everything, and they would probably go into nihilism. That is something I'm more certain about. I don't know if they would most probably take up hedonism. I would say they would go into nihilism if this illusion of, because frankly speaking, most people believe in objective morality, right? That is like a fact of some sorts. I do think that most people believe in objective morality. They think that whether it be due to religion or even the far left or left of center people, they believe that there exists a morality, but just that it does not relate to a religion. That's what they believe. But I think if it was completely shattered, this illusion of objective morality, I do think first and fundamentally they will go into nihilism. Not necessarily, but there is a high chance. And subsequently, to deal with this nihilism, they would probably go into hedonism. That's at least what I think.
But can I ask you something? Like, if there is an argument for the theist that if you're an atheist, you don't really have any moral values. So, like you don't have any moral code to live by. So you do whatever you want. Like, kind of kill and rape however you want. So, which really doesn't happen. Like, which is and also about the selfishness thing. I have not read the book, but Richard Dawkins' Selfish Gene kind of says that it's the genes that they're kind of selfish. Like, earlier times we used to live in like separate in like isolated as groups, as families, so as tribes. So a person they have the kind of the genes, the selfishness of gene, like they really want to survive, so they would, rather than just thinking about that person individual itself, they would really care about the others too, like who are really related to them. And in the big sense, we like humanity is related to each other in the larger picture. So whether we would really just care about like individual selfish needs. So that's
That's interesting, because two things that I want to point out is, the first thing is that I didn't explicitly state that without religion there would be no morality. I think people believe that objective morality exists even without religion. They believe that. I think like there are a lot of left of center activities. One example would be Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, right? And she honestly believes, from what I've seen, honestly believes that there exists an objective morality, and she even quotes this: it's important to be morally correct rather than factually correct. And she really believes it. From what I've seen, this is fundamentally my experience, and believe me, I don't have a lot of experience. but what I'm saying is that, like, most people believe that objective morality exists, whether it is through religion or not. And even if we consider people who are not religious, like most people are religious, right? In the world, most people are religious, and that's the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that most people believe in objective morality, and that does not necessarily mean that people don't have values. Because, for example, in my case, what I do is I have these certain values that I think about. I abide by these principles, and I think fundamentally one of the most sophisticated strategy that human beings have come up with is something called delayed gratification. Right? It's like delayed gratification. Yeah. So basically, they delay gratification too, so that their future selves could enjoy stuff, right? And that's very interesting in the sense that I think it's all very complicated. We can never predict what human behavior is going to go for, and even if most humans would agree with this strategy of delayed gratification, and mostly this delayed gratification is being sustained by these moral codes and moral systems and religion and everything, that they are sustaining this delayed gratification principle. And I think perhaps without that, there is a possibility that we could go into hedonism, and most importantly, nihilism, right? And the second question, addressing the second question of selfishness, what about suicide? Like, suicide does not affect the gene in any way whatsoever. Like, suicide is fundamentally a destructive act, and in the sense that, suicide has no benefits to, for the survival of the group or the gene whatsoever. Like, this is actually, I had this kind of discussion with one of my friends, and he brought up this argument of Richard Dawkins' self-esteem, and that's what I said. Like, what about suicide? Suicide is fundamentally a destructive act that helps no one. You can't even propagate your gene or anything. How do you explain that based on that sort of framework? Right?
Yeah, but suicide, it is kind of done for a very selfish reason, to just end the. I think the suffering pleasure kind of thing too comes here, right? It's we generally want to reduce the suffering, and maybe the who do kind of think about suicide want to just end their suffering in that sense. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Go on.
No, go on. Sorry. Nidan.
Yeah. So. Nidan, are you there?
Yeah, I'm still there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I've been going in and out of this speech for quite a while, right?
Yeah.
I'm assuming that you are still discussing about two things. One is hedonism and other is suicide, right? So I didn't know what hedonism was, so I just Googled it, and I found it has something to do with chasing pleasures, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. So then again, a definition issue comes in. I like to point out this issue, right? So what is pleasure, right? Like, when you have, say, a religion has a concept of heaven and hell, right? Getting to heaven is pleasure. So will you do things that cause you pain in earth so that you could go to heaven and enjoy the pleasures there, right? There is no objective definition, right? Like, not everybody believes in heaven. And if for people who believe in heaven, that is something worth going for, that is an act of pleasure. So would they...
I think he got disconnected a little bit.
Yeah.
Am I being heard now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go on.
Am I being heard now?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, you're being heard. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I was coming to is that what constitutes pain and pleasure cannot be defined in an objective manner, right? Just like morality, like I define what is pain for me. So someone's pleasure might be someone's pain for me. Like, there are suicide attackers who believe that they will go to heaven. That seems like a terrible thing for me, but for them, they're actually going to heaven, right? That's pleasure for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I was trying to convey was the fact that, like, here is some, I was saying, like, how without these values and morality and all that stuff, there is a high chance, potential chance. I'm not saying it is like a direct consequence, but there is potential chance of people going nihilism and hedonism. Fundamentally, first into nihilism, then combat that nihilism into hedonism and all that stuff. And I think this is time for us to, I think, a fundamental issue, like, with all these stuff is we are assuming we have free will, right? Fundamentally, we are assuming, and that was one argument that we came up with. We are assuming that we have free will, and let's. I would like to, like, I did, if I remember correctly. Let me see if I still got it. I actually did like a kind of logical proof. I don't know if this is correct or not, of why free will exists. I kind of did that. I usually do these weird things all the time, but let me just see if I can get that kind of argument and see if I can refute the existence of determinism. And see, there is another thing. That's a very interesting argument that Michio Kaku posed, that quantum mechanics does not abide by the rules of physics, right? Quantum mechanics. It's like there are these particles. We can only use statistics to analyze the probability of where they will be. And there's this interesting thing, like, if you can know the position, like, it's almost as if there are these experiments that act as if these particles fundamentally have consciousness themselves. Like, if you, there are, I forgot the experiment, and my knowledge of physics is not that great, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but there are these experiments that seem to suggest, perhaps this is fundamentally, we can't know this, suggest that whether they have, like, these sort of consciousness or not. But the fact of the matter is, we cannot never predict exactly what these particles are going to do, right? So that's kind of what Michio Kaku poses, that perhaps because we have fundamentally free will because we are made up of these particles and all that stuff. That's an argument. And like one of the things that I have, like, problems with determinism is the fact that if the universe is fundamentally deterministic, like, it demolishes everything that I stand for. Whereas that's why I don't accept determinism. It demolishes every single thing that I do. It's like quite, let's say, it's quite sad, to be honest. Honestly speaking, it's quite sad if the universe was actually deterministic. Now, I would like to post an argument. Like, let's think about this. So assume, I'm gonna move through proof of contradiction. Like, assume we don't have free will, right? Assume we don't have free will. So there are these thoughts. I have no idea. I'm coming up with this argument as on the flow. So I have no idea if this is gonna work. So let's see. Let's just think about this. So we have these thoughts, right? We have thoughts, and now the thing is that our actions. Let these thoughts be desires, right? Desires are let's consider them as a subset of thoughts, right? Desires are a subset of thoughts, some kind of thought. Now, there is this thing about existence. Now, it fundamentally comes down to whether we exist or not. What does it mean to exist? Right? These are all questions related with it, right? So let's say, we have to start somewhere. We have to start somewhere. And fundamentally, I think, therefore I am. So do you agree with that? I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I exist. Right?
Do you exist because you can think? Like, is the fact
you
that you can think is a proof for our existence?
It's kind of like not a proof. It's more like an axiom in the sense that it's just an assumption, right? I think, therefore I exist. And
basically, I would like that to be true. I cannot know for sure, but I would like that to be true.
That's interesting. Like, that's interesting in the sense that this is one of the things that I did. Like, let's assume that free will is a contradiction, and we're assuming. Let's think about this. Okay. Free will is a contradiction. Yeah.
Like, whether free will exists or not, I don't like. It shouldn't really change the way we think about life. Like, it's basically about wants. Like, what determines someone's wants, like the background, the way we live, the opportunities we have, the family, society, everything really exists. Like, depends on it. So, free will, like, in the sense that, like, we will choose what is most desirable for us at that moment, and that fact is determined by many things. So whether free will exists or not, really shouldn't really change the way we live. It's an illusion we would like to live in. Like, we would like to have to think like, yeah, I have the choice to choose. I have the choice. So that is exactly what we probably, it kind of says that what we choose, what we think we are choosing in the, we are actually choosing without any influences. That is, that fact is influenced by many things. Am I making any sense?
Kind of. Like, I think the fundamental thing is what he said. I agree with what he said. I think it's most likely that there is like an ego, and there are these other unconscious, like other conscious entities that we have around the ego, and what these entities influences in some way. And fundamentally, it's the ego, that is us, that makes the decisions, that actively conjure up thoughts, manifest them out into the world. I think that's what I strongly believe that, and I even think about it axiomatically. Like, I think that for thoughts, if you have thoughts, right, it implies that it is true. Like, it is something you know. It's like it's a fundamental axiom. That's how I think about free will, in the sense that it is a fundamental axiom. Like, you are free. That's like the only axiom there is. You know, that's kind of how I think about it. Frankly, I don't have any kind of proof for that. I really hope I did. I have a proof for that, but fundamentally, I don't have any proof for that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we have much exceeded the time. So Nidan, like, we can kind of conclude it up around one and
yeah. We can conclude it up. So is Nidan still there? Like,
In my case, it's kind of messier. Like, my laptop is running out of battery, and my internet is running out, and I have a stop connection. Right, I'm leading a multi-front bar here with my sound. I think you have enough material for 3 episodes now. We have talked for what 1 hour and 40 minutes. I think it's a respectable time to wind up. Maybe leave some material for next time.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you everyone for watching. Like, please comment down what you think about it, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Recording topic.
Yeah, sure. I'm ending the meeting, all right?
Okay.